Hello everyone, welcome to my first Paint With Me video. Today I'm going to be doing some watercolor paintings, two different ones. So I'm just getting set up here, taking out some tools, one of which is my very favorite watercolor tool, the Inktense watercolor pencils. And funny enough, I did not end up using these in this video. I had maybe thought I would use them, but hopefully I'll use them in a later video and we can see how they work. I really do adore them though. To start, I thought maybe I'll sketch something out and then thought better of it because I don't normally sketch when I work with watercolor. I'm going to get some water and I'm going to do a very simple but tried and true method, which is the wet on wet watercolor technique. Now, if you have ever worked with watercolors before, you most likely have done this sort of technique. It's very, very simple. All you do is you grab a wide brush and you're going to saturate the entire page in water before applying any color to it. The reason you do this is because it is wet on wet. So you're applying more wet watercolor, to the actual wet page. And this allows the watercolors to kind of spread and move around a little bit more fluidly than normal. And I really like this technique. It gives you a good ability to build a softer, fluid background, which you can then build upon. Watercolors love to layer, if you didn't know. But anyway, we are going to start painting. I grabbed my size 8 pointed round sable brush. I'm going to dip in one of my favorite colors, or actually my ultimate favorite color, yellow. And I'm starting to paint the background here, adding some sunspots, which are going to start moving around on their own from the paper already being wet. And that is the beauty of the wet on wet technique, is it allows those colors to move around and kind of dance on their own. So overall here, we're just saturating the paper with some yellow color and filling out that page. All right, so I'm thinking at this point, that's enough yellow. I'm gonna go in with some orange, make some sunspots here. I just kind of dotted randomly across the page, and I'm gonna start by building outward from this yellow stripe that I have in the middle of my page and build upwards and outwards with the orange tones that I'm adding. And I'm kind of going in this cloud-like motion. It's not really strict lines and it's not really specific shapes or anything like that. We're just kind of dabbing across the page, spreading it out a little bit, and then going back in to add more color. All right, so at this point, I'm adding some more orange, but I am starting to feel like we need more color, we need more shapes. So I'm finally starting to spread out to the other regions of the painting that I haven't really touched yet. And just as a reminder, if you're doing the wet on wet technique, and I'm adding this huge circle here, you can start to see eventually that if you wait too long, that water's going to dry on the sections you haven't touched and you have to reapply. So for me, I just keep on adding water with my brush as I'm moving around. This way, I don't leave any dry spots on the page if I'm trying to create a more fluid and solid background that is seamless. If you do, it's perfectly normal to make that intentional. But I think for this painting, you can start to see where there are sections that are a little bit more dry on the bottom, where I'll have to go over and add another layer, which that's no problem for me. I don't mind doing that. I'm starting to make these kind of more intense orange spots here. And I'm covering up that circle, which it's funny because that circle kind of turns into something else eventually. But for now, we've got some orange reddish clouds and you can start to see how they bleed into the rest of the paper as I put them down with my brush. All right, at this point, I am really not sure where this painting is going. I do my best to come up with a concept beforehand to guide me, but I almost never have an idea of what the painting will or should look like. I also think that as an artist, it can be really harmful to the creative process to force yourself into an idea and try and replicate it completely on the first shot. I don't think that's always possible. There may be people out there that disagree with this or that feel like maybe they can execute their idea on the first go and it's perfect and it's how they envisioned it. But I don't think I've ever met an artist that feels that way. I don't think I've ever spoken to an artist that says, oh, yeah, I can totally put my vision down on paper or make it happen. And it's exactly how I pictured it. It's part of the creative process, I think, to evolve your ideas and to change them over time. So here I jumped to the dry version of that layer, and I'm going to start adding in some new shapes. And this essentially was the concept that I kind of had in my head. It's similar to what I have been doing with my acrylic paintings lately, where I create these organic freeform shapes with different crazy colors, and they kind of remind me of cells or some type of organic matter. I'm not really sure where the inspiration comes from exactly, but I do enjoy looking at these kind of funky, weird shapes that are nothing specific. But, anyways, back to that whole rant about the creative process. I think as an artist, it can be really challenging to force yourself to create, especially if it's been a really long time, and to create something that you really, really love on that first try after not having practiced for a while or just in general feeling uninspired. And I gotta be honest, I am not in love with this painting at the end. And that is 100% okay. I think it's a learning process, it's a practice, and as a practice, it needs to be something that you do a lot to feel really happy and comfortable with it, as well as happy with the pieces that you ended up creating. Not every piece is going to be your favorite, you know? I think that's something that a lot of artists struggle with as well, is loving their work wholeheartedly. I have never met an artist that likes every single one of their pieces that they have made. So I think that's just an unattainable concept. I don't think anyone can really do that. For me, right here, I'm just gonna note this one example. This line that I'm making in orange right here, it looks like a peanut, and I cannot get that visualization out of my head. It just looks like a peanut shape to me. And I thought that when I was making it, and I immediately was unsure of what I was going to do. I thickened up the line to try and make it look more organic, I guess. I don't even really know. And then I made another one over here, and I didn't really like that one either. So then I thickened up the line. I made it more bold on one side to kind of de-emphasize that shape. And to be honest, they look like potatoes. I'm not gonna lie. They do. They do kind of look like potatoes. And that's totally okay. We're gonna de emphasize that by making some other funky shapes, which I will get to in just a moment. I have to wash my brush, add some water, and here we go. We're gonna add some more lines on the top. But instead of just leaving that one isolated shape, I'm going to add more lines and make it into this kind of cellular formation where there are different spots, like empty sections inside. And it's going to grow, and I'm going to add more sections to it. And this almost reminds me of an abstract honeycomb of sorts, or like if you've ever seen cells, how they have different parts of them that look kind of like this. That's what it reminds me of. All right, so we are nearing the end of this painting here. Don't get too excited yet, but I am going to go over some of these other lines towards the bottom and left side of the paper. At this point, I think I dropped some sort of piece off of my paintbrush. Yep, there it is. Get rid of that. And I'm going to redefine this line here, which I absolutely love how that color turns out. It's so bright and fun, and just redefining that line looks so beautiful. And on the other side of this shape, I'm actually going to go over those lines too and make those a little bit more defined. And I actually didn't notice this until now, but it almost looks like a heart that is kind of dissolving into these different shapes, if you can see that. At this point, I really liked where those dots were going, so I added more of them. And to me, they kind of look like giraffe spots or like spotted scales or something like that. And so I kind of went in and added some more shapes next to that to add more interest. And I even kind of extended that theme of those pockets of empty color with this like cellular structure over here. I just really love how those little splotches of color kind of spread out and blend into the paper. All right, enough of that little piece on the bottom. We're gonna go back and oops, dropped my brush. I have to fix that now. I'm gonna go back over that little potato shape section on the top right. We're gonna just fix that up and act as if that little dot was just intentional and honestly not even that noticeable. We are just gonna make more dots around it. And honestly, this was a happy accident. I will be so honest here. I am so glad that that happened because now it looks a lot less like a potato and more like a dissolving cell or something more organic. So I chose to run with that. I added it to that other peanut shape and now it does not look so much like a peanut anymore, which made me super happy. And yet again, I'm going over that one section on the bottom to really make that red super intense, super in your face, and really just super powerful. And finally, I get to that other section on the left side, which I had been ignoring for so long. I think I was just worried that it was still super wet and I didn't want to touch it until it was drier again. So that's why. Sometimes you have to ignore certain sections of your watercolor painting in order for them to just dry and have time. Which that leads me to another lesson in watercolor, which is that you need to be patient. Give it some time. Watercolors need to dry in between layers, especially if you don't want to ruin anything and you don't want colors to blend in a way that's unexpected. You just got to give them some time. They need some time to breathe, to just dry up, and then you can go back on top with your second layer. Just slow down, okay? And to be honest, it does not take that long. So you'll have to wait maybe 5 to 10 minutes, maybe a little bit more. It does depend on how wet the paper is at the time. And you don't want to overwork the paper because then you can tear it and it'll start to get all crummy and gross. But honestly, take your time. Okay, anyway, so back to the painting. I am now doing kind of a reverse effect of what I had been doing before with those open shapes, and I'm filling in the spots, leaving some negative space in between each. So, reverse of what I was doing prior. And I'm going to continue that motif on the top left with the bottom right corner of my paper and kind of put it underneath that red section that I had worked so hard to make bold before because I don't want it to distract from that big bright red section that I have worked on. So it's kind of underneath. This, I think, gives it a little bit more depth. So if you're trying to create layers to the painting to make them look more three-dimensional, I suggest doing something like this where you have those big, bold, brighter shapes in the front that are catching your attention, and then these kind of whimsical, looser elements in the background that float underneath. And if you have to, you could even paint with taped out sections, so covering those more bolder sections to protect them, but you want to make sure that they're like completely dry before you do anything like that. Now I'm adding another cellular formation, another little floating cellular doodad in the front here, just to really push that red section as the main interest point of the painting. Okay, so here we are. We are very, very close to the end here with this painting, and I am going to just finish it up by adding these little tiny, teeny tiny details. And at the end, I will reveal this painting once it's all finished and dry. And in a moment, we're going to switch over and I'm going to do a second painting. So I think I'm done with this one. So let's move on. Okay, so here we are. We are doing now painting number 2. This is going to be a mountain forest type of landscape, and I am starting off the almost exact same way that I started the other painting with that wet on wet technique. I'm just saturating my paper with water, but I'm sure you might notice that I'm not going all the way across the paper. This time I'm leaving an intentional frayed edge. So I'm leaving kind of the open edges of the paper, which would be like your margins, I guess you could call them. And I'm leaving them open so that I can have that naturally frayed edge towards the sides. You may also have noticed that I left that bottom section of the paper uncoated with water, and this is because I'm doing a second layer on top of this whole section, and I don't need that bottom section to be colored in at all yet because it's going to be colored over anyway. So I'm starting out with some blue at the bottom, and I'm going to add some purple and I'm going to start blending it out here. Now, I really do have to say, please trust the process on this one. I know it looks strange a little bit at first, maybe not, but to me, I had to trust the process on this one. Sometimes these kind of paintings, because I've done them before, they work out well or they're not really up to my satisfaction. So we'll see how this one goes. I so far love the mixing of the colors. I have no problem with the blue and the purple. I think those are turning out pretty well, but we'll see how it goes as I move upwards. And eventually I'm going to have to blend out that purple into some pink tones. So for a bit, I'm going to have to add some more purple and blend out those deeper indigo tones that I had below it. And you can start to see that I'm not going in long strokes as I had been before. I do them here and there, but I think the most effective way to get that color down is really just pressing it into the paper with those small little taps of the brush. Sometimes you can see that I do go back and forth, but I think the most effective way to get that color on is to really just tap it into the paper like I'm doing here. So I'm adding some purple, pink, magenta-y colors. I went back over with the purple because I felt like it was kind of fading, and you can always add more color. You can't really add less color or take away color. So I'm adding a ton more color. It's going to dry also a little less intense, so I'm not too worried about it being too dark right now. I'm adding more of that magenta-y color. And eventually I'm going to add some red. So I'm starting to kind of change the tones of my color. This one is a very interesting pinky tone, which is kind of in between a magenta and a red. And there is some more of it, which you can see the wet on wet is really, really working in my favor here. I am not doing very much to get it to move around, but you can see how different the effectivity is between me pressing the color in with those smaller brushstrokes rather than those long, smooth brushstrokes. But you also might be thinking, well, what if those smooth brushstrokes look nicer because they're smoother? Well, I'll tell you this. This wet on wet technique is going to let those colors bleed and move around anyway, so I'm not too concerned with the smoothness of how they're going to look right now. And actually, in a moment, you're going to see how much they can actually change because of the amount of water that is on this paper. So I'm adding even more color here, even more, because you can really, really push that color with this wet on wet. And I'm going to pick up my paper and whoa, like a roller coaster, those colors are going to move. And I love it. Look at it. So good. That purple really, really travels. So I'm going to take a minute. I'm going to spread that out so it has somewhere to go. We don't get those streaky lines. And this time I'm actually going to add more blue down here because I think it needs it to combat that really strong purple. Because I don't want that blue to go away completely. And I don't mind that I'm just bringing it down a little bit more. Sometimes you have to. I'm just adapting because in this case, the purple had nowhere to go. And I don't want to get streaks underneath my second layer. So I'd rather have this underneath. There we go. So that's going to be the bottom. That's hopefully where I'm going to stop the watercolor from moving anywhere else. Okay, at this point, this section of the painting I know feels like it's dragging on forever. So I'm going to click ahead here. And now we get to see more of the fun part. Yay. So I'm picking up the painting here. I'm going to move it around, but I do want to caution you, if you're going to do something like this, please be patient with it because some of your colors might not go where you want them to go. Watercolor has a mind of its own, and especially, I don't know why, but this purple color just like loves to move. I think that section was just really, really saturated with water. So I'm just going to get rid of those streaks. Now, if you really liked them, sorry. They're going to get covered up anyway, so don't worry about it. And I am going to jump to when this is all dry in just a moment. Yes, here we go. So now my background has dried. I'm going to go in with some blue and make these far away, long mountains. And they are just blue in color. I'm not going to do anything crazy to them, but I'm making them look like they're pretty far away. So to do that, you want that color to be saturated at the top and most intense up at the top of the mountain edge, and then kind of fade away the bottom section of the mountain so it looks like they're further away and kind of misty underneath. I'm adding another mountain in here. This one's kind of a little bit closer maybe, but not as big. But we're still doing that really dark blue edge to the edge of the mountain. And then we're going to blend it out to make it look like that mountain is pretty far away, even though it might still be a little bit closer than the other one. All right, so once I finish these mountains up, I'm going to kind of blend them out a little bit more. And notice I'm not going past that boundary that I've created on the side. I am doing that intentionally. I want that frayed edge to look a little bit more like this was maybe done as a quick study while I was outside and maybe examining these mountains and watching them from afar. But I will be completely honest, I do not have a reference image for this painting, and I didn't have a reference image for the other painting either. So when I'm doing this, this is completely techniques that I've learned to just build up landscapes. And this technique is going to be making some nice wide pine trees. Okay? So if you've ever done a landscape and you don't understand how to do these kind of trees, I'm going to tell you. Okay? This is your cheat sheet to how to make pine trees really, really easy. So I don't recommend using a pointed round brush the way that I'm using. I would recommend doing a fan brush, which actually is the method that Bob Ross teaches if you've ever seen those old episodes of his show. Listen, this is the way to do it. I gotta say, I have been doing this for years. But basically, you do like one really, really long line, and then you just kind of make these short little lines going across in a zigzag motion as you go down the tree and just get wider and wider and wider. And for me, I've been doing this for a while now, so it's a very quick and simple process. It comes like second nature. But the one thing I will say, if you're doing it with watercolor like I am here, you gotta blend out that stem of the tree. Otherwise, it looks quite strange. And frankly, you never see the stems of these trees or the trunk of these trees because they're all hidden and smushed together. So here I'm doing another one. I'm gonna go up and make that long skinny line, and immediately I go back and forth with my brush and make that tree wider with those little tree branches going out and building on. And I will say, I am going to be the bearer of bad news in a couple seconds, but you'll see what I mean in a minute. I'm just going to keep on blending this out, and I'm actually going to bring on that color all the way to the bottom section, so much so that it looks like these trees are blending together and are almost just one unified layer on this landscape. All right, so I'm just continuing down, and you're gonna start to see that I'm filling in all these empty pockets of space because I don't want this to look like there are holes in between the trees. I want it to look like this forest is so filled that there are literally no gaps in between the trees. There's constantly just other greenery surrounding the trees that are there, the different spaces, and unfortunately, here's the bad news. So it was at this time that my camera stopped recording the video. But anyway, here are the final two paintings.